What's up guys, Johnny here. Welcome back to my channel. So as you guys have probably noticed as of late, I've really started to get into FPV racing. And in order to improve on that craft and keep racing, I decided I need to be able to do something to practice. Now typically what I do is I just fly around, some trees, some obstacles, try to maintain my altitude, work on throttle control and things of that nature. But I felt like in order to really improve my craft, I had to break out some FPV gates, be able to set up a real track and race on that. What I've noticed is that without the gates, you're just not as precise as when you have a small gate to try to fly through. And that really forces you to work on your control and really get the sort of control with the sticks that I want to get to so I can compete more and more in races. Now, one thing that's very important to me is the amount of time it takes to set up a course. I don't have a lot of time. I work a full-time job and then some. I have a family, I have a daughter, lots of things that compete for my time. So anything I can do to save time when setting up and tearing down a track, that's a big bonus for me. So for that reason, I really want to get a hold of something like PopUp Gates. I had seen people reviewing Forza Gates online, and that seemed like a really good option. It seemed popular, but the big concern I had was the shipping costs. It looked like shipping started at $20 to ship 2 gates and went up from there. So I decided to take a look and see what I could find online with free shipping, and then order all those gates and then see what the differences are, see what you get for your money, and then share that with you guys. So I wound up purchasing 3 different types of soccer goals that I could use as FPV gates off of Amazon. All of them shipped Amazon Prime, so all of them had free shipping. I bought the Trailblaze 6-foot soccer net, I bought the Golmi 6-foot soccer net, and then I also bought the Scandinavian Sports 6-foot soccer net. At the time that I made the purchase, the Golmi net was $59.95, the Scandinavian Sports was $59.95, and the Blaze nets were actually $39.95. So that was quite a discount, and I was really curious to see if the quality stood up in the $40 gates versus the $60. And that's $60 or $40 for a pair of 6-foot gates. These are the exact same size as the Forza gates that you've probably seen reviewed somewhere else. So I wasn't quite ready when they showed up at my doorstep, shipped from Amazon. These boxes were massive. They were taking up my entire front porch. They ship in huge boxes. So it's no doubt that the Forza gates were worth the $20 shipping plus that they cost. I was really impressed that these massive boxes were able to ship for free. But it was actually kind of comical when I came home and saw these massive boxes sitting outside my door. So I opened up all the different boxes, pulled out all the different goals. I wound up cutting out all of the netting that was inside the nets. It actually took quite a bit of time to get it out there. It wasn't difficult. It made a little bit of a mess, but it definitely took some time to get done. Now, once these gates were all set up, they were pretty small. They're about 3.5 feet tall and 6 feet wide. And when you're flying with a 5-inch quad, that 3.5 height is definitely pretty tight. A standard multi-GP gate that we do in the multi-GP races is 5 feet by 5 feet. So when you're doing these pop-up gates for these soccer nets, they're definitely a lot smaller. And I was okay with that. I knew they were smaller going in. I just figured if I can learn and practice on the small gates, by the time I get out to the race course with a 5 foot by 5 foot gate, it should be no problem. So just by luck, after I started checking out some of these pop-up gates and comparing the 3 different ones that I had purchased, I saw that Ready Made RC was coming out with quad-action gates. Now, on the surface, when I saw these were announced, they looked like they solved all the problems I would have with the small pop-up gates. So they're quite a bit larger. They come in at 5 feet by 5 feet. Now, that's not exactly the same size as a multi-GP gate just because the shape of the multi-GP is kind of square versus the ones with the quad-action gates have more of an arch on them. But still, it's very close to what you're going to be racing in multi-GP, so you can start hitting them with a bit more speed and confidence than you'd have with some of the smaller gates. But even on top of that, you can also flip the gates over, and now you have a 4 foot tall by 5 foot wide gate, so you can have that more advanced target if you want to practice in that way. It's a real nice flexible option. Another great thing about the quad action gates is it was designed from the ground up to be an FPV quad racing gate. There's no netting to cut out, everything's already done for you. You just have to assemble it this time instead of cutting out the netting. So I noticed when I took them out, when it showed up, it actually showed up in a really small box. It looked like a reasonable box this time, and it was really easy for me to assemble. There was no instructions in the box on how to put them together, but I was totally able to put it together without any issue. It basically comes in with 2 different rods that you just have to fold and then piece together. I went up using some duct tape on it just to make sure it stayed in there, because I knew when I was pulling it out of the ground, it'd likely to come apart inside of the gate, and I didn't want that to happen. So I went through, pieced them all together, put some tape on it, and then just slid it through the fabric. It was really, really easy to set up. In total, I would say that I spent about the same amount of time setting up the gates with the quad action gates as I did cutting out the netting with the pop-up soccer nets. And I think that's pretty impressive, given that I didn't have to do those gigantic boxes on my front porch. So in order to put these things to the test for you guys, I decided to put together a race course. I used all of my gates and I wanted to set them up in such a way that it was a challenging course for me. I wanted to make sure I was crashing. I want to crash into the gates. I want to crash around the gates. I want to make sure these things are durable and they're going to last in a real world where you're not just easily flying through a straight line right through all the gates. As I mentioned, time is of the essence for me, so I really appreciated just how quickly I was able to get a brand new course set up. If I wasn't using PopUp Gates, I know it would have been at least twice as long, and I just don't have the time for that. Now, this was probably the most difficult course that I've ever flown, and I crashed a lot during the day. I'd say I probably flew about 20 batteries, and I probably crashed on 15 to 16 batteries, and on quite a few batteries I crashed multiple times. And the other thing I'll say about the difficulty of this course is those small pop-up soccer nets, they're really small. So that definitely added a very challenging element that I wasn't quite used to from racing on the multi-GP courses. Those gates just tend to be that much bigger. So one thing that turned out to be kind of a blessing in disguise when I went out there is it was extremely windy that day. There were probably wind gusts of 30, 35 miles an hour. And what really became apparent to me is that the number one feature that I like the most of the quad action gates also turned out to be their biggest downfall. Because they are larger, because they have more fabric, they act like sails in the wind. And I was fighting these things like crazy. So even though my course was set up, I kept having my gates get knocked over, get blown over. It was really becoming a big hassle. To try to work around this, I wound up taking the netting around the goal and wrapping it around to make the area smaller. But even when I did that, the wind was still enough to knock these gates over. It's just so much size that they don't have quite the same stability as the soccer nets. So on top of that, I mentioned the number one benefit of the quad action gates. To me, it's their visibility inside the camera. When you're flying and you see these little tiny soccer nets with the black netting, you can't see it till you get pretty close to it. In order to work around that, I plan on adding some sort of reflective masking tape, so hopefully I can see it from more of a distance. But when you're flying and you see quad action gates, you can see them the whole time. It's really easy to line them up. When they're not being blown over, I absolutely love trying to fly through those gates. So since it didn't work to roll the fabric around them, I wound up flipping the gates over and made them 4 feet tall by 5 feet wide. And what I noticed is with that smaller shape, they're a lot more stable. And I wasn't having them falling over anymore. They'd still get blown around and the shape would change, but they weren't getting totally knocked over. So that was a really nice option to have with the quad action gates. So if it is really windy, you do have an option there. The last thing I would say is if you do want to fly the 5 foot by 5 foot size of the gates, and it is really windy outside, you're probably going to have to add some guide wires. That's okay, but the thing is, for me, time is really important. And if I have to break out guide wires and set those up, I'm basically at the same point as if I was setting up multi-GP gates, and I'm not saving that time. I'm not getting that time advantage. Now, with the wind, I will say, with the little soccer nets, they had zero issue whatsoever with the wind. Even with the strong wind gusts, they kept their shape really well. They weren't blown around in the wind. They weren't getting knocked over at all. And I think that's largely because of the smaller shape. Makes it more sturdy, but also because there's so much less fabric, there's just less to be caught in the wind. It doesn't act like a sail like the quad action gates did. So again, it's just a trade-off. If you can fly in really calm days, definitely the quad action gates are a much better experience in my opinion. But for all-around versatility and windy or not windy, those soccer nets make a really, really compelling option. So like I mentioned, I crashed a lot during this testing. I smacked into probably every single gate that was out there, and I'll say at the end of the day, none of my gates had much damage on them at all. Maybe one had like a small scratch in the fabric, maybe a tiny little hole, but that's about it. These things stood up amazing. So from durability standpoint with the soccer nets, I didn't notice a difference whatsoever. Which means if you're looking at these things and you have an option to buy the Blaze soccer nets for $39.95, it's an amazing deal compared to everything else. I didn't mention the price of the quad action gates, but they come in at $64.95, so just slightly more than the soccer nets. but you're also getting a much higher quality gate at the same time, as long as you're okay with the fact that they don't do quite as well in the wind. So bottom line, even though I was really only anticipating getting the soccer nets and trying those, I'm really glad that in the end I went up with a variety of gates that I could test with. Now, one big thing for me is I know there's going to be days where it's really windy. Well, the soccer nets work really, really well for that. So if it's really windy and I want to test out, do some racing, I can just go out there, set up the soccer goals, race through those, and have a great time. And a day where it's more calm, I make sure to include those quad action gates because they really open up the types of courses that I can set up. And it really helps me with practicing for multi-GP because the size of the gate is so similar to what I'm racing in multi-GP. So if you guys are looking to get your own setup, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it if you guys are trying to get into racing and trying to improve your skills, definitely check out the $40 gates. It's totally a bargain. And if you have a little bit more money and you're willing to deal with the slight frustration of the quad action gates, overall, those things are absolutely fantastic. I love the visibility of them. I love the flexibility of the 4-foot height and 5-foot height. I love just flying through them, the courses you can set up with them, the ease of installation. Everything still fits in the car. Even though the gates got bigger, both still fit in my car. I do have to put the back seat down, but I had to do that with the soccer nets anyway. So get the $40 gates if you're concerned about price. If you're not worried, definitely pick up the quad action gates. I'm loving them all. I'm glad I have a variety of both. And if you want the best of both worlds like I do, just pick up both of them. I'm going to leave some links down below for where you guys can pick these up if you want. Like I said, 3 of them are from Amazon and 1 comes from Ready Made RC. All links will be below. If you guys really want to improve your racing game, definitely check them out. And as always, guys, I'll catch y'all next time. Peace!